Well, hey there, you're on the internet, I have some free time, and welcome to the Triple N Network, where all you newbie nib nerds can find all the news you'll need. Let's look at an ink today, shall we? Now, today's ink, I have in sample form. It's by Herbin, and it's called, brace yourselves, Poussiere de Lune, which means something of the moon. Yeah, I didn't study French. They made me take sign language. But yeah, it's a purple ink, and I know I've said in some of my previous reviews that I'm not a big fan of Herbin, which is, I'd say, accurate. But a lot of times it's for different reasons for different inks, and so just the brand overall. Also, I grew up with, people constantly gave me Herbin inks in the little, the tins. There's so many of these tins around. So people would give me the cartridges, and I have honestly tried every single one of these, and one of the things is they tend to be a bit dry. They tend to be a bit undersaturated. That was not the case with this one so much. It's a purple, obviously. Also, the bottles are annoying to try and use to fill your pen, but anyways, speaking of pens, what was used was this JinHao. I'm never sure if it's a 250 or if it's supposed to be called an X250. But anyways, they only come in one size. It's a number 5 nib, and it's a medium. And this one is a very medium. It's not overly broad or overly wet or dry or any of that, so yep. Now, I thought I'd compare it to a few other inks. So here's Poussiere de Lune. It's a dark, rich purple. It's quite lovely in that regard, but oddly, I couldn't find many inks that were quite like this one. So the closest I could find was Diatramentus Scented Black Currant, which just seems to be a little bit lighter and maybe have just a touch less red in it, and Diatramentus Aubergine, which tends to have just a little bit more pink in it and is maybe just, I don't know, more shady or, yeah. I thought I'd see how it would hold up to various things. So here's how it does against ammonia pen flush. Here's how it does against water. Here's how it does against isopropyl alcohol. Here's denatured alcohol. And here's 1/3 bleach. Yeah, so. And chromatography, which was kind of weird looking. So, in other words, kind of cool. Now, you can see where the initial drop was put, and you can probably also see that there's almost like a gray in this purple. And then it gets pushed up a little bit, and then here you see some of that like more red in the purple, and then you get this fuzzy stuff on top. But then I let it dry, which is not how you're supposed to do it, and I hope this comes through on camera. You don't get it on this one, but this one you do. You see that weird halo of like light blue? Weird, right? And then the dot got darker, but other than that, the middle bits seem to be the same. Anyways, paper test, top, down, and density, Clairefontaine, 90 grams per square meter. I'll try and hold this still so you can get a good look, but I am so caffeinated. You see that? You see that? This ink ran wet. I mean, I like my inks slightly wet. I like them, like a 5.5 out of 10, just a hair on the side of wet is my preference, because a lot of my pens do have baby's bottoms because I do prefer broader pens, and that tends to happen. But this was wet. It was so eager to come out of this pen. So yeah, we don't get a lot of shading on here because there was just so much ink put down. But also, you can even see it on here. I wish I could get close enough to really show it, but you get a dark outline. You get a halo effect, which is, I like it. I think it's lovely. Now, this medium did take 16 seconds to dry, but I'll take it because it's very dense paper, and this was a very wet ink. Now, it was very well behaved in the regard of it being, no bleeding, no feathering, no spread, no echo, no sheen. All good in that regard. Now, it resisted water a lot more than I remember it used to, so that's nice. It did dye the page. But as you can see, what at the center is very clear, very dark, very there. It did feather a little bit, but if you had to recover that, you could. Next up is Rhodia, 80 grams per square meter, where again, I wish this would come through on camera, but you definitely get a halo effect. There is a like a dark outline around it, which I love. It's very subtle, but still. Here it took 17 seconds to dry, and look at how wet that was. It's a very bold purple. I actually quite like this color. It's lovely. Now, there's no bleed, no feather, no spread, no sheen, no echo. And again, it resisted water better than I remember, although for some reason that S went really light. Weird. But yeah, it did dye the page a bit. It is much lighter, but if you had to recover that, you could. And here, there wasn't much bleeding or spread, just sort of got woolly. All good stuff so far. Now, next up is Tomoe River Paper. And there's something interesting that the color of this ink does on cream paper. I don't know how to describe it. It's almost like, it takes on like a tiny brown undertone. I don't know. It's fascinating. Here you most certainly get a dark halo. I'm going to try and bring this in without giving you guys motion sickness. You see around that M, it gets darker. And you see it here too, like right there. Yeah. Now, again, this stuff is really wet, and this paper has this thing where it draws out dry time, so 23 seconds. But there's something about the color of this ink, the quality of it on this paper I really loved, and I love a halo effect, so this was fantastic for me. Now, Tomoe River loves to let ink slide away when you add more water, and a lot of it did. It is much lighter, but it didn't dye the page, and what's at the center is actually quite clear. So if your life depended on recovering this, I feel like you could. Now, this ink is fairly dark, and this paper is quite thin, so there is a bit of an echo problem. I'm sensitive, but I also don't write on the back of paper, but yeah, again, it's always a personal preference thing, so. Now, for the next 3 tests, that wet flow is going to cause some problems. So here on the 20-pound copier paper, I'm going to bring this in because I want you to see this. Do you see the difference in the width of the writing between here and here? I mean, this looks like a European broad at this point. It got massive. And also, see all that? See all those feathers? Yeah. So there's no shading left. The color is still fairly, I mean, it's purple. You know, you really know that it's purple. It took 2.5 seconds to dry. Yeah. As absorbent as this paper is, the fact that you could smear it that much says how wet it was. Yeah, there's spread, there's feathering, and there is most definitely bleed. It very nearly comes through pretty much like in little dots everywhere. Definitely like soaked into the paper. But that's also what helped it resist water so much. I mean, it did feather and it did explode a bit. It dyed the page just a tiny bit, but that's still pretty darn dark and very there. So if you had to recover that, you could. Now next up is Mead Notebook Paper, where you get a woolly texture. Now bear in mind this paper is thinner than 20-pound copier paper. You do get a bit of a woolliness, but you don't really get feathering like we did before. It's just sort of a woolly texture. Now it took 3 seconds to dry, and this is absorbent paper, so the fact that it smeared that much definitely says something. Again, it is very obviously a purple paper, but that wet flow really did a number on this paper. Now it's soaked all the way, like it's soaked deep into the paper, but it very nearly came through in several spots. So I guess you'd have to use like a extra fine or something, you know, to make it work, it's got to be tamped down a lot. Now this paper hates water, so it completely like warped the page, gave it a completely different texture. It's weird, but yeah, there's spread, there's feathering, it exploded, it dyed the page a bit, but again, it's still fairly there, fairly dark, because it was sucked deep into the paper, so if you had to recover that, you could. Now, next up, lastly, is Moleskine paper. And there's something weird that this paper did to the color of this ink. Do you see that? Do you see the difference in the purple? And it's not just the cream color. I don't know if this is going to come through on camera, but it actually has like a brown undertone. If you guys are familiar with Noodler's Nightshade, that would be like an extreme exaggerated version of this, because it's purple with some brown and it's weird. But anyways, that's just the color. Yeah, the fact that, I mean, obviously this is absorbent paper. You can tell because of how much this looks like wet wool when it's soaked in. But the fact that it still took 7 seconds to dry, and look at that smear. Now, I don't even have to bring it in that close, but when I do, you can see, look at these insane feathers. This looks hideous. This looks gross. This does not look good. Yeah, so it really doesn't play well. And since it's everywhere, as you can see, it is absolutely everywhere. I don't think that putting this in a drier nib or a finer nib would necessarily help. I think there's something about this ink that just gets into just a murderous fist fight with this kind of paper. Something does not jive here. And once again, we get something that looks like it crawled out of Jim Henson's Creature Shop, because there is insane feathering to the point where it's, like, stuff's overlapping. It's nuts. It exploded. If you're really good at Magic Eye, you know, maybe you could recover that if you had to. But yeah, you also get, I mean, it actually came through, like fully came through in several spots, and it's happening throughout, so there's bleed. It's not good in that regard, so Moleskine is a no. Do not recommend. So, here we go. There's Herbin Poussiere de Lune. I just murdered that. I apologize to anyone who's even associated with France. But yeah, it's a wonderful dark purple. It is wet flowing, or at least my version was this decade. Yeah, it does like a great halo effect. I mean, it's gorgeous on more water-resistant papers, more premium papers. It surprised me. It had more water resistance than I remember. You know, my memory of this ink is so different than the experience I had with these and this sample, but it was probably about a decade ago. So I'd love to hear your experience with this ink. Leave a comment down below. Yeah, for your consideration from the Triple N Network. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel. And thanks for watching. Bye.